What's up, everybody? Tim Anderson here, aka Renfill, the bearded dwarven princess, and we're back with another episode of Mondays in Middle Earth as we continue our read through of the Two Towers. Currently, we're working on reading the entirety of the Lord of the Rings from The Hobbit all the way through to the end of the Lord of the Rings, and we're also going to try to hit the Silmarillion as well, all before Rings of Power comes out, so we can continue to poke holes in what we see coming out ahead of the Rings of Power, or perhaps use as a talking point around the Rings of Power show when it comes out. But in any case, it's great to be getting back to this after not having read it since 2000 2001, so it's been 20 some years. As I've continued to rediscover Tolkien and, of course, re-educate myself on some things that I didn't know or had forgotten about. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, don't forget to check those out. And of course, don't forget to follow along, like, subscribe, all those good things. If you want to get the rest of these episodes, read along with us here. There's a dedicated Discord channel. Links are down below if you want to come hang out with us. Chapters we're reading through this week are Chapter 5, The White Rider, and Chapter 6, The King of the Golden Hall, being from The Two Towers, which is Book 3 of The Lord of the Rings. Let me settle in, get a little comfortable here. So we start chapter 5 off with having ended the previous chapter where they saw some sketchy stuff, and there was a well, actually, the previous chapter was Treebeard, but when we left off with Gimli and Aragorn and Legolas, they had woken up to find their horses had been scared off in the night, and they saw an old man in their camp, who we can only assume was Saruman. We start this chapter off with Gimli complaining about the cold and the fact that they shouldn't forget about the old man they saw the night before. And he really just wants to find a boot print to prove that it was a physical person and not just an apparition. He's obsessed with the idea that it's Saruman, which is theoretically could be true, and it's a good starting point because I would be scared about Saruman if I was in that realm as well. But the fact that the horses were spooked off as well could be keyed into that. But then Legolas says, the horses being spooked off is, could be tied to that, but it didn't sound like they were scared when they ran off. It sounded more like they were beasts wild with some sudden gladness. Um, Going as horses will when they meet a friend they have long missed, which, of course, as we know, is a bit of foreshadowing. Spoiler alert for those of you who've never read the book. Um, we know Gandalf is in the area, and we know that Shadowfax is nearby. So the horses have obviously run off the Shadowfax, but that still doesn't get rid of the old man thing. Um, as we continue with this, they continue the reading of the signs here. In terms of Aragorn going down and reading the tracks and everything else. And we, of course, are seeing what happened when Merry and Pippin escaped from the orcs, but being told from the perspective of Aragorn reading the tracks and Legolas and Gimli, and the three of them sort of putting together what they see with the tracks that Aragorn is finding and sort of coming up with a similar scenario, all of which eventually leads them to the edges of Fangorn Forest. And as they're tracking him here, I love the part when they come to the ledge, because the ledge is where they meet Treebeard, and Aragorn can track anything. This is like he's one of the best trackers of the realm. And they get here, and he's like, "Well, these are Hobbit marks, but these marks here, I don't think I've ever seen those before. I have no idea what this is. Kind of sketchy." And as they're continuing to track through the forest, this is when Legolas looks behind them and sees an old man. It doesn't say darting, but it says an old man passing from tree to tree in dirty gray rags. Aragorn looks and says it looks to him like a beggar man walking wearily and leaning on a rough staff. But the way he's moving through the trees, it sounds furtive to me, like he's trying not to be seen but following them. And this entire scene is pretty cool because they're not sure if it's Saruman or not, and they finally confront him. And when they do, Gimli's immediately wanting to attack and everything, but when he speaks, their weapons fall from their hands. Like they can't bring themselves to attack him. And he's definitely put a spell over them with his words. And it's not until they get a gleam of whiteness from beneath the robes that immediately the spell breaks. They grab their weapons again and they're getting ready to attack. And just at the last moment, Legolas realizes who it is and shoots his arrow into the sky and cries out, "Mithrandir, Mithrandir!" Um, and that's when Aragorn realizes who it is as well and goes, "Gandalf, Gandalf." And Gandalf, it is Gandalf, of course. "Oh, yes, that was my name, and you can still use it, but I'm different now. I'm Saruman as he should have been." And he mentions the fact that he can now see things very far off, but there are things close at hand that he cannot see. So this is a reunion of sorts, and I love the um, the movie version of this is very well done. Um, it's not quite as lengthy as it is in the books, but it's very well done visually, I thought. There's an interesting tidbit here where I didn't remember this at all. Gandalf talks about where he says very nearly the ring was revealed to the enemy, but it escaped, and I had some small part in that, for I sat in a high place, and I strove with the dark tower, and the shadow passed. But then I was weary, very weary, and I walked long in dark thought. So, Gandalf, this may have been when Frodo had the ring on and was on Amon Sul, I think is what it's called, and he's looking out and he feels the ring, he feels the presence, and he gets down just in time, and it swoops over his head. I don't know when exactly Gandalf is referring to, but we do get this speech that he strove with the Dark One himself to avert his gaze so that he couldn't see what Frodo was up to. Um, we now get this huge. I mean, this is a great chapter, by the way. It's a very long chapter. This first chapter here, chapter 5. Gandalf starts talking here about how Saruman only believes that they want to bring the ring and use it against him, and not even in his darkest dream has he considered that they want to destroy it. I get a lot of text here about how Sauron is terrified of a hero rising up who might use the ring against him, and he's looking at Minas Tirith as the focal point of all of his rage and anger because it's a beacon of hope. It's the city of the kings. It's where the heir to Numenor will go. So he's going to be focused on Minas Tirith as his primary objective in the sense that he doesn't want all of the races coming against him again. And as they finish up with all this storytelling, Gandalf looks out towards the east. And this is a really cool scene. He says he looks out towards the east, shading his eyes as if he sees things far away that none of the others can see. And he says, he's kind of muttering to himself, and he's like, "It's gone beyond our reach, or it's gone beyond our reach. Of at least that let us be glad, because we can no longer be tempted to use the ring. That deadly peril is at least removed." So it's interesting that he says this because he's been told of Boromir's passing, and even he is still struggling at this juncture with the thought that if the ring had remained with them, some of them, maybe even he himself, would have been tempted to use the ring to face Sauron. And he says here, at least that deadly peril is removed from us by circumstance. Very interesting moment in the chapter here. We also get a very lengthy section about what happened during the Battle of the Balrog and the fight with the Balrog, the fact that he passed into shadow and came back again, walked naked for a time, went to Lothlorien to recuperate. Um, from a perspective of the greater lore building that Tolkien has put into his world and the realm beyond and the other dimension, we're getting a lot of that in this chapter because Gandalf's revealing a lot of different stuff here for the lore junkies, which is a really cool section of the chapter. We also, of course, find out this is the point where we find out that the horses didn't run away, in fact, but they ran to meet Shadowfax, and from here they begin the ride to Rohan because Gandalf is pushing them there, saying, "Look, we can't do anything for Frodo and Merry. The Ents have taken care of Isengard. We need to ride to Rohan. King Théoden needs our help. Let's go." And as they're riding and they look due west to the Gap of Rohan, they see a great smoke rising from the area of Isengard, and Gandalf says, "War is at hand. Ride on!" So he's pushing them, and then we get into chapter 6, which is the King of the Golden Hall. Um, Very interesting here as they ride past the tombs of the kings of Rohan. Legolas says that it has been 500 years since Meduseld, the Golden Hall of Edorlas, was built. And there's another section of poetry here about King Errol the Young and Felaroth, the father of horses. Now, the show that's coming out, the War of the Rohirrim, is set some 500 plus years before the Lord of the Rings. So I think we're getting maybe the construction of Helm's Deep, but it maybe will lead up to the construction of Meduseld and Edoras in that film. I'm not sure, but that's the timeline we're looking at. What's very cool here is when they ride up to Rohan, this is not shown in the films at all. When they get to Edoras, the guards halt them at the gates and speak the language of Rohan. They don't speak the common tongue. They greet them in the language of the Eorlingas. And Gandalf chides them on this and says, "If you wish to be answered, then perhaps you should use the common tongue, as is the courtesy among the people of the West." And the response is, "Well, we got word from King Théoden that none save those who know our tongue and are our friends should be welcome in days of war." But then we find out that this didn't actually come from the king, but it came from Wormtongue, which makes Gandalf quite alarmed. There's this scene here. I gotta switch my notes here where they're being told to give up their weapons, and Aragorn is quite upset about this. He says, especially when the guard's like, why should I give him a weapon? The guard's like, because King Théoden said so. And he says, how is the will of Théoden, son of Thingol, even though he be Lord of the Mark? How should his will prevail over the will of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elendil's heir to Gondor? So Aragorn is having a very prideful moment here, going, I'm the High King, bitch. I'm not going to put down my sword for any other king. I am the High King. Théoden should not be asking me to do this. And Hama responds, this is the house of Théoden, not of Aragorn. And even were he king of Gondor in the seat of Denethor, it would not be so. And this is when he lowers his sword and points the point towards Aragorn. What's interesting here is previously in the chapter when they all showed up, the guards put their hilts forward as a sign of peace, but now they've turned the swords around and it's point first. And Hama is basically saying, "Hey, don't mess around here. Like this is our king, and I will defend my king. I don't care if you are Aragorn, son of Arathorn. This is Theoden's turf." So a very cool scene here going on with like the egos of some powerful men at play here. Um, Aragorn's being quite a bit testy. Gandalf tells him to back off, but Aragorn replies, "I would if it were any sword but Anduril, but this is the sword." There's this whole scene here, uh, because as they all put down their weapons, Hama looks at Gandalf and says, "Hey, your staff." And Gandalf says, "Oh, foolishness! Prudence is one thing, but this courtesy is another. I'm old. If I might not let me know I stick as I go in, I will sit out here until it pleases the king to hobble out here and speak to me himself." But Aragorn literally responds and laughs and says, all men have something they're unwilling to part with. So even Aragorn here is like, hey, I just had to give up Andoril. You need to give up your staff, like a little bit. But he does go on to say, Hama, come on, man. It's an old man. It's a staff. Let him have it. But it's good that Aragorn can see the humor in this situation because even he was very attached to his sword. Um, Now this whole scene where they go in to Medalus and basically, Gandalf casts out the shadow and becomes this beacon of light in the hall and kicks Saruman out. This scene is a lot more abrupt in the books. It's way better in the films. I love the way they did the scene where he's drawing the poison out of King Théoden, and he's writhing around, and you hear the voice of Saruman coming through, and that scene in the films is so well done and very representative, I think, of the scene in the book, even though the scene in the book is quite a little bit different, but very interesting nonetheless. This is also the first time we see Eowyn, one of the most badass women in all of fantasy literature. She's described here as fair and cold like a morning of pale spring before womanhood. And this is important, I think, for something that I'm going to talk about at the end of this. Um, but as this is going on, we get the King Théoden coming back to his self and stepping outside of his hall for the first time and looking out over his kingdom as the clouds disappear and Saruman's power retreats back to Isengard. Um, Gandalf says, perhaps the feel of your sword in your hand would make you feel better. And of course, his sword is in hiding because Wormtongue hid it, and we get told that we cannot find it. Let's see if you know, you know. Let's see where the sword is. And as this is happening, they've released Éomer from prison, and he steps up and he offers his sword to the king. And this is a cool gesture because also he was just put in prison by the king, but even so, he realizes that it wasn't the king; it was Grima Wormtongue and the evil at play. And he's always been about the kingdom first, Éomer. So he offers up his sword here. It's really cool. Um, from here, it's literally just a call to war. The rest of this chapter is all about it's time to go to war. It's Gandalf pushing Theoden. We got to go. We got to go. You got to get your people out. We got to go. We got to get them to here. We got to get the people safe. And then we got to ride. We got to ride to Isengard. And Wormtongue gets here with the sword at this point, and Theoden actually offers him a chance to redeem himself if he will but ride to war and prove his faith. But he tries to weasel out of it by saying, Lord, please leave me as the steward of Edorlas until you return. And at this point, Gandalf gets pissed, and he literally says, Down, snake! Down on your belly in a terrible voice, is what the text says. How long is it since Saruman bought you? What was the promised price? When all the men were dead, you were to pick your share of the treasure and take the woman you desire. Too long have you watched her under your eyelids and haunted her step. And this is creepy. So he's a lecherous old dude who's had his eye on Eowyn. Gandalf says, "Give this man a horse and let him go at once wherever he chooses, and by his choice you shall judge him. And at this point, Wormtongue spits at the king's feet and flees, showing his true colors at last. Now, something I didn't remember from my previous read through here, which is a little bit of foreshadowing, is when Aragorn takes the cup. I say foreshadowing for the film. When Aragorn takes the cup from Eowyn's hand here, it says that he's troubled because she trembles at his touch and she gives him like this sideways glance. And um, later on, but when he does the cup thing, his hand brushes hers and she trembles and looks up at him and she feels his presence. Um, I feel like they definitely took inspiration from that when they did what they did in the films, which they made her more definitely kind of flirting with Aragorn, and how she pined for him. But it also explains in the book, and this is the one point where I will cede to some of the people who have said that, I'm not ceding it. How do I explain this? Uh, Tolkien wrote his books at a different time when chivalry and the idea of a man, a manly man, a knightly man, a kingly man having a presence that would shake a woman, that would not necessarily inspire is not the word I'm looking for, but he would have a presence that would cause a woman to get weak in the knees, if that might be maybe what I'm understanding from the text, and I could be misreading that, and some people could be viewing this as sexist. But it talks about here that she was barely on the cusp of womanhood, which in my mind says that she was probably a teenager, late teens, early 20s at the earliest, or at the latest, I should say. So it stands to reason here that she's feeling the presence of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, a Númenórean who is strong and tall and proud and handsome. And here she is, this sort of, you know, warrior in training who has longed to meet a man like Aragorn, maybe reading them in the fairy tales and so on and so forth. And this is the first time she's ever seen an outsider like this. Like she's grown up in the courts of Théoden. And I don't know, there's just a lot going on here. And I wonder how much of the criticism that some of the woke generation is trying to apply to Tolkien in regards to him being sexist is coming from something like this, where we have this extremely powerful female character, nevertheless feeling overwhelmed and lesser than Aragorn. That's what I'm taking from the text. I leave that open to discussion. I'm saying I think this may be where some people might be feeling it. I could be wrong. In any case, Gandalf fully reveals himself at this end of this chapter, throws off his gray rags, and proclaims himself Gandalf the White. And Aragorn cries out, "Behold the White Rider!" And the Eorlings shout out, "Our king and the Right Rider!" And then they ride to war, and that's where we end. So this was a very heavy couple of chapters here. We're into the thick of it now, ladies and gentlemen. On to war, riding to Isengard. Helm's Deep is just around the corner. I can't wait to share it with everybody. So hopefully you'll follow along for the rest of these episodes. Don't forget, if you like what you hear, do a super thanks in the video. We'll see you in Discord and in the next episode. Drop your comments down. Let's have a discussion in the Discord section. Until next time, everybody, safe reading.